Too Much Information is a production of iHeart.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to Too Much Information, the show that brings you the secret histories and little-known fascinating facts and figures behind your favorite movies, music, TV shows, and apes. We are your evolved chimps of esoteric charm. I'm Alex Heigl.
And I'm Jordan Runtagh, and I'm not going to be able to make it through this episode.
And Jordan, today we are celebrating the end of APE-ril.
Oh my God!
A pun that doesn't make any sense until you see it spelled out, which our listeners never will. Anyway, we're doing the original Planet of the Apes from 1968 because there's a new entry in the actually really good rebooted chronology that's coming out this summer.
Oh wow, I didn't know
It's really
that.
good.
Oh.
Everyone should check it out. You could probably skip the first one actually because Franco's in it and it's not as good, but I think it's 2 or 3 now that have come after that are super good. Anyway, I don't know. This episode might get delayed. It might drop next week, in which case, welcome to MAPE. Anyway, Planet of the Apes Whips. It's a hilarious movie. Just one of the weirdest and best things to stumble across on cable as a kid. I don't think I ever actually sat down and watched this movie in its entirety.
Really?
Until like college. And it was hilarious. But rewatching it this week, I was like, no, this is a good movie. Like, it's really well shot and the makeup is still pretty good, which must have I can't stress how much it must have blown people's minds in the 60s. If we're looking at it today and we're like, that's not bad. I mean, it is, but it's like, it's uncanny and accurate enough to achieve the really intended effects. Anyway, yeah, I mean, my dad or The Simpsons had pretty much already explained everything about this movie to me, from take your stinking paw off me, you damn dirty ape, or you maniacs, you blew it up. But it is a foundational and really interesting piece of sci-fi and an equal masterclass in the art of spinning crap off, even though I still don't understand how it's possible to be beneath the Planet of the Apes. Is that a subterranean thing?
Yeah, I always assumed it was.
Subterranean? Anyway, Jordan, talk to me about your relationship with Planet of the Apes.
Similar to yours, but my mom was really into all the Twilight Zone-y type stuff and all the kind of creepy, weird sci-fi things. And so she kind of, if I recall correctly, I think she definitely spoiled the ending of this for me before I actually saw it. But I actually sat down to watch it as a little kid, and my mind was absolutely blown. I thought it was one of the most just deep, incredible, cerebral works of fiction I'd ever seen. And then over the next couple years, the humor started to reveal itself to me. Probably having watched the Tim Burton movie and being like, oh wait, that wasn't that good. And then The Simpsons, of course, with Dr. Zaius, the musical.
Peak era Simpsons writers loved this movie.
Yes.
Because not just, there's obviously like the musical in the one episode, but like they just keep throwing it in. Why do I remember the phrase apes a poppin'? Instead of like hell's a poppin'?
Yeah,
like that rings a bell for some reason. Apes of Wrath too, I think, is a Simpsons pun. So I'm just like
And then I feel like the phrase "get your hands off me, you damn dirty apes" was like one of the things that kids in my playground used to say a lot at recess. And so it sort of took on this hokey, kitschy, which is fair, but revisiting it for this episode, I feel like I did when I was a kid again. Like, wait, you're right. This is amazing.
Yeah. I mean, it is kind of the bell curve you come around when you're like in the 60s, or if you're a child, you were like, holy shit, this is the best movie I've ever seen. And then you come around to it being hilarious and overblown in all the ways that it is. And then you come back around and be like, well, this is actually really well shot. And like, Charlton Heston's doing something in it, as is Roddy McDowall and Kim Hunter and Dr. Zaius.
But the problem is just the word apes, as we talked about earlier.
Yeah.
It's a hilarious word.
Oh my God.
I was going to say, there's going to be a lot of me just laughing at nothing in this episode because
the word ape.
Well, monkeys, monkey and monkey planet is all. Monkeys plural isn't funny. Monkey singular is funny to me.
Apes
is hilarious. Yeah. I mean, yeah, it's going to be just me giggling like an idiot in this episode. So I'm sorry.
I mean, you know what's funny? I'm just thinking of now. Simeon isn't really as funny to me.
No.
Truly a mystery. We should get a linguist on that.
You woke up this morning with Much like Paul McCartney woke up with Yesterday in his head from a dream, you woke up with a song today. Isn't that true?
I did. I woke up this morning with Stuck in the Middle with You in my head, and I've been unable to stop singing. Chimps to the left of me, gorillas to my right, here I am, stuck in the middle with apes. I don't know what the actual lyrics are. And your apes, they all come crawling, throw you in a net and say, chimpanzee, chimpanzee. Bum, 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 bum. And there you go, folks. Well, from the original author's time in one of World War II's less famous atrocities to the groundbreaking makeup that made all of them go so ape, to the role that Sammy Davis Jr. played in cueing the film's producers into a whole new take on their film, here's everything you didn't know about 1968's Planet of the Apes. It turns out that I was wrong about the French not contributing anything to society beyond Debussy and, possibly as an edge case, The Fifth Element. The cinematic empire that is apes, and we will broadly be referring to it as just apes because it's funnier, was launched by a 1963 novel called La Planète des Singes, or as it was translated to in the UK, Monkey Planet.
This franchise would have bombed if it had been known as Monkey Planet.
Yes, it's such a case study in like correct linguistic foibles, you know, because like, yeah, Monkey Planet, hilarious. Planet of the Apes, gravitas. That book, Monkey Planet, was written by Pierre Boulle, who also wrote The Bridge Over the River Kwai.
That's incredible.
Which, if you paid me $1 million to guess that the man responsible for Bridge Over the River Kwai was also responsible for Monkey Planet, never could have gotten it. Yeah, that just blew my mind, man. Bridge Over the River Kwai, for like Zoomers, or we don't have any Zoomers who listen to the show, is like, you know, one of the more famous World War II movies. It's where you get the dun 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 dun, and also like a gripping performance by Sir Alec Guinness,
a pre-Obi-Wan.
Mm-hmm. Anyway, Boulle was he was trained as an engineer, and he worked for the Luxembourg-based petrochemical concern Socfin in what was then known as British Malay, a collection of states on the Malayan Peninsula, and Singapore. He was like scraping rubber out of trees. And Socfin, I looked up, has their roots in the Belgian Congo, which means they are monsters, and their empire is built on blood.
If there's a country that has another country's name as the prefix, it's probably built French Guiana.
Yeah, and Belgian especially. King Leopold's Ghost was a book that I read about that, of just like the extensive atrocities they committed in the name of rubber.
One of the less successful U2 songs. Come on, give us a little bit of it. Come on.
That was
I
good.
can't sing that high. In the name of rubber.
Yeah. What about It's a Beautiful Ape? Okay. When WWII, the big one, broke out, Boulle enlisted with the French army in Indochina, and after the German troops occupied France and the French surrendered, he joined the Free French Mission in Singapore. He wrote that he was trained at a place called the Convent, where, as he wrote, serious gentlemen taught us the art of blowing up a bridge, attaching explosives to the side of a ship, derailing a train, as well as that of dispatching to the next world, as silently as possible, a nighttime guard. Dispatching
to the next world. That's the most French way to describe killing someone that I've ever heard.
Not a serious people. As a secret agent under the assumed name Peter John Rule, Boulle helped the resistance movement in China, Burma, and French Indochina until in 1943, so basically 2 years later, he was captured by Vichy France loyalists on the Mekong River because, as a true Frenchman, he caved under interrogation. That's not entirely accurate. His mission was to make contact with, France at the time was split between the Vichy government, who were Nazi loyalists, and the French resistance. And as a member of the resistance, he was hoping to make contact with a resistance sympathetic Vichy official and he bet on the wrong one. He was being interrogated, and he was like, "Okay, guys, actually, here's my thing. I'm a spy, and I'm hoping that you are sympathetic to my cause." And they were like, "We are not," and sentenced him to a lifetime of work.
Aren't we all sentenced to a lifetime of work?
Well, not as bad as the Burma Railway, where Boole worked, because it is perhaps best known by its more whimsical name, the Death River. It was built from 1940 to 1943 by Southeast Asians and a smaller group of captured Allied soldiers, and the brutal conditions there resulted in the deaths of over 90,000 civilians, along with 12,000 Allied soldiers. That's horrible, and that's what Bridge on River Kwai is about. But Boole's novel and the subsequent film about his experience was a worldwide hit, cleaned up at the Oscars, won 7 in 1957, including Best Picture and Best Actor for Alec Guinness. Sir Alec Guinness, please excuse me. Boole himself won the award for Best Adapted Screenplay, despite not having written the screenplay, and by his own admission, not even speaking English, because the film's actual screenwriters, Carl Foreman and Michael Wilson, had been blacklisted during the McCarthy era, which is a theme we will return to.
This all brings us back, of course, to the apes. Riding high off the success of River Kwai, Boole kept writing, publishing 5 other novels along with essays and nonfiction before he got started on what would become known as Planet of the Apes. At least one person has suggested that Boole brought his experience in World War II into apes, but from what you've read, Boole, who gave very few interviews in his life, which he basically ended as a semi-recluse, didn't consider Planet of the Apes a work of pure fiction. Rather, he preferred the term, quote, social fantasy, another very French term, which placed him on a lineage of satirists like Jonathan Swift, who wrote
Modest Proposal
about the rich eating their young.
Yeah, I mean, it was about eating Irish children.
Yeah, oh, that was it. Yeah,
and making them into handbags and gloves.
Right. And also,
it was not received well.
Gulliver's Travels too was kind of a similar.
Yes. Yeah, I think that kind of stuff was the impetus for Boole doing this, and I've heard multiple people refer to this as like a Gulliver's Travels analog.
That's interesting. I never would have made that connection. Huh.
Yeah, me neither.
He told a French television program that sought him out and somehow was successful in getting an interview in 1970. I regard the absurd as an extremely powerful pole of attraction in human activity. Whenever I look around me, I am plunged into an ocean of absurdity. You should get that embroidered on a throw pillow. Jesus.
Yeah, he's not wrong.
Yeah. Boole would say that he was inspired to write Monkey Planet by watching gorillas at the zoo.
That is the official translated name.
I was impressed by their human-like expressions, he said. It led me to dwell upon and imagine the relationships between humans and apes. Boole's novel doesn't actually take place on Earth, however. Its setting is a planet in the system of Betelgeuse, where 2 travelers find a literal message in a bottle floating in space. They read the manuscript within by a French journalist named Ulysses Moreau, and much of the memorable bits of the film are included here.
It's just so funny to me that it's epistolary. Like he went with like the oldest framing device of all time. The characters found someone else's diary.
That's really cool. There's character plot points with Zira, Cornelius, Dr. Zaius, as well as an archaeological dig in which traces of an earlier human society are discovered, including a human doll that cries, Papa. Oh
yeah, you don't remember that?
Oh, now I do. Oh, that's
part
creepy.
of the archaeological dig. Although when I heard it, I was like, they didn't really get the best toy doll to do that, because it literally just sounds like,
That's pretty scary, though.
Oh yeah. It's a great gotcha moment in the film.
Oh,
Dr. Zaius.
It makes me think of about when the guy discovered the Titanic, went diving down there, and at the time they didn't know whether or not there would be human remains down there or not. And so he's in the sub going across, featureless sand, and suddenly he sees this face staring back at him through the porthole, and it's a child's porcelain doll, but just like perfectly preserved.
Oh God, yeah, you told me that. Yeah. Oh.
Yeah. Dolls,
Not
when you
okay.
don't expect dolls, are the scariest kind of dolls.
Well said.
Shout out to friend of the pod, Allie, who's running a
Broken Dolls, eagerly anticipated by Stephen King.
Friend of the pod, Stephen King.
Friend of the I'm
we'll
fine
give
with
it to
Stevie.
him. We'll give it to him.
Stevie King, or Steve King. That's what his like campus paper called him, with that like famous picture of him looking absolutely like unhinged with the full beard and long hair. Steve King. Anyway.
At the end of the account in Boole's original Planet of the Apes book, memorably titled Monkey Planet, the man writes that upon his eventual return to Earth, he's greeted at the airport by an ape driving a truck, leading to the horrified twist.
You have to read it like Zoidberg.
Or
he was on Earth in the future, maybe? And then the final twist is that the people reading the letter are chimps themselves.
So we are the chimps? The readers of the book are chimps?
Well, no, the couple reading the letter are chimps.
Oh, okay.
The novel ends with a double twist of the guy who wrote the account ending up on Ape Earth, and then the people reading his account in a spaceship are also apes. So it's like a double ape Jeopardy kind of situation.
That's like M. Night Shyamalan would like go walk into the ocean if he heard that. That was like that's too many twists.
It's a little too many.
That's so many twists that it doesn't register as a twist. That's what happens. If you twist too many times, you're right back where you started. It's like going 360. This is the largest difference between the book and the 1968 movie. Ironically, though, Tim Burton's adaptation was closer to the book's ending than the one Charlton Heston starred in. How does that one end? I forget.
Abraham Lincoln, you fool.
Oh, Jesus, of course.
At the Lincoln Memorial.
Oh,
yeah.
my God. That's right.
God, that movie is so bad. They really thought they had something. They thought they were cooking.
But on the other hand, could it be good?
I mean, everybody who's an ape is amazing. It's just that it hangs on Wahlberg. And he can't summon the manic energy of Heston in that movie. His like version of intensity is to just look like sleepier and a little bit more angry. Just so funny because he literally blinded a man in his youth. Yeah, that's a PSA to everyone. And he is trying to get that expunged from his record so that he can become a sheriff's deputy.
In the greater Boston area?
Yeah. In Marky Mark. Yeah, it's funny because that movie has a stacked apes cast. It's like Helena Bonham Carter is Zira. Michael Clark Duncan is the gorilla general. Tim Roth is the chimp bad guy. And they're all so good. Just hanging it on Marky Mark was a bad idea. Anyway.
How do you think it could have been saved? Who would you have cast in the Tim Burton Planet of the Apes to make it not suck as the main?
You know who I instantly thought? Keanu.
I was going to say Nick Cage, but also good.
Oh, yeah. Cage would have been good. He would have brought the requisite level of insanity.
Yeah.
Yeah. 2001 era Burton. I could have seen if he gone back to the well with Johnny Depp.
Oh, yeah. My problem with Marky Mark is that around the same time he had that movie Rockstar that came out, and I've blended the two in my head. So I just think
that he's an ape singing hair metal
and like kind of like slouching around with like a guitar strapped to his back.
Yeah.
On Planet of the Apes, and it which is kind of a much better movie in my head.
Yeah, like he goes there and teaches them to rock.
Yeah, it's like School of Rock meets Planet of the Apes.
Verbal contract. There's a brilliant idea, and we're going to make it. I'm not sure where Boole's stock was 6 years after River Kwai came out, but it was apparently high enough that Monkey Planet was optioned before publication by producer and former Hollywood power publicist Arthur P. Jacobs. He was actually Marilyn Monroe's publicist right before she died.
I mean, for our purposes, he's going to talk like the cigar chomping executive.
Oh, he will. He very much will. Funnily enough, Jacobs was so focused on family-friendly movies that he had made Dr. Dolittle prior to this with Rex Harrison, that he sold the rights to Midnight Cowboy because he didn't want to make... let's just say he uses the worst term for gay people in the one book, or the one interview I read.
What's this flick about urban decay? Give me more animals.
Give me more apes.
I want another movie where the guy talks to the animals.
Well, this next graph is even more funny in that voice. He said it started in Paris in 1963. Two primary sources for this is the wonderful Planet of the Apes Revisited and the Behind the Planet of the Apes documentary, which you can find on Internet Archive, hosted by Roddy McDowell. Jacob said, I was looking for material and I would meet with various literary agents. Asked what he was looking for, he mentioned something like King Kong, which is... Again, the cigar chopping executive meeting like a Parisian bistro being like, I need a King Kong pick. What do you baguette eaters got in your slush pile? One agent, while pitching a different client, told Jacobs, speaking of King Kong, I've got a thing here and it's so far out I don't think you can make it. It can't be filmed. How can you make talking apes believable? Boole actually didn't like his own novel very much. He called it second tier. But I guess when you're ranking your own work behind Bridge on the River Kwai, that's fair. Jacobs immediately embarked on getting the film rolling. He passed copies of the novel version of Monkey Planet to MGM, Paramount Pictures, and Marlon Brando, offering him the role that Charlton Heston would eventually land, with a groveling letter that Brando never answered. Jacobs even went the extra mile of having a Warner Brothers studio artist draft up some concept art and send it to Brando after the initial letter. And Brando was still like, no. I'm very invested in this high-calorie diet of mine.
It seems like something
bad Brando.
Seems like that was a good Brando. Seems like something he would have done. I mean, what was that? Island of Dr. Moreau? Like, maybe that was later. I guess that was later enough that he was like, all right, fine.
Yeah. What was he doing? I mean, this is Fat Brando era, right? Because that's why they have to shoot around him in Apocalypse Now.
Apocalypse Now was 79. This was like the weird mid-period between On the Waterfront and The Godfather, when he was doing like, wasn't he like Julius Caesar or something in the 60s? He was in like a bunch of what I believe to be bad 60s movies.
Well, Paul Newman was another early candidate for the lead. And aside from those two, they were also thinking of Steve McQueen, who would have been good, Rod Taylor, and George Peppard, who I don't know who that is.
George Peppard, he is the male lead in Breakfast at Tiffany's. Oh. Did you know that Marlon Brando was Zapata, the Mexican resistance leader?
Yes, in a horrifying fake nose and brown face.
In brown face, and they did something to his eyes. I don't know what they did to his eyes.
What have you done to its eyes? Rosemary's Baby. What was I going to say? Oh, he has that in common with Charlton Heston, because Charlton Heston made Touch of Evil with Orson Welles, where they put him in brown face.
Oh, yeah.
Anyway, I've also heard that insanely they were courting Jack Lemmon, which I guess he has like a scrawny kind of everyman appeal to him, but...
Get your goddamn hands off me. Damn dirty apes.
Yeah, that's how, yeah. And Rock Hudson. They also suggested Ursula Andress as Lady Ape. The most unsettling thing about this movie to me is like...
being attracted to the ape?
Yeah, like the sexual tension between Taylor and Zero, which is amplified dramatically in the Tim Burton one. One of the ideas for the sequels treatments was that they were going to have like a half ape, half human thing. And then they were like, wait, that implies bestiality directly. And scrapped it.
Oh, isn't that the same deal with Avatar? Let's go down like movies that have like interspecies.
Well, Avatar, I'm not sure that it counts because they're human consciousness projected into like lab grown beings. I think they're cloned or vat grown. Movies with, you're talking interspecies?
Yeah.
Oh God. The Fly.
Oh, okay.
That's certainly a union of sorts. I'm not going to keep talking about this. This is weird.
Superman?
I mean, I guess. None of the studios wanted this movie.
Little Mermaid.
And Jacobs did. Yeah, okay, that one I would accept. Yeah, ew, what would their love child be?
Half fish, half man.
But which half?
Roll the dice, baby.
I guess that's my question is like, how does it work with mermaids? Like, are they locked into fish bottom human half, or could you end up with fish top human bottom?
I also Miss Piggy and Kermit the Frog.
Oh yeah, man. What is it? But they have kids, right?
Yeah, well, at least in Muppets Christmas Carol.
Yeah, and they're frogs. Tiny Tim is a frog. He's not a horrific. They just split the difference. Yeah, where they're like some of them are pigs and some of them are frogs.
Yeah.
I'm about to write a letter.
I mean, there's Shrek, too.
Oh, yeah, the donkey dragon abominations. Yeah, those actually are horrifying and accurate. Anyway, none of the studios wanted it, and Jacobs did get as far as negotiations with Fox, but they balked at the budget and put the project into turnaround. Paramount also stalled out on the money end of things, and United Artists felt that the novel was impossible to translate. They were talking to Fritz Lang, who famously directed Metropolis, about this, but he was deemed a hard sell for the studios. Eventually, they attached Pink Panther director Blake Edwards' names to it, and with that, Warner Brothers was on board.
I mean, were they going to try to play it for laughs? Would they have had like a Peter Sellers Ulf who just like bumbles his way through an ape civilization? Or
I don't think so. I think like an early concern for all of them was that this would just be laughed at. So they were like trying to play it as po-faced as possible, like at every stretch. Like they initially, if you see the old initial like the test footage that they shot of it with Edward G. Robinson as Dr. Zaius, he's like dressed in a suit, and they were quickly like, no. Give them like Roman togas or whatever, like Nehru suits or whatever they're actually wearing. They were like, we cannot have them wearing actual human clothes. Arthur Jacobs sent a letter to his French lit agent buddy, because this guy had been getting antsy and was like, I can't hold the rights. I can't give you this exclusivity for much longer. And told him that Shirley MacLaine was going to star because she had been in one of Jacobs' previous films, and ultimately she would not star in Planet of the Apes. But Jacobs had already secured a crucial presence for the film by that time. Rod Serling, baby. I always forget that he was a WWII paratrooper.
whoa. Can you imagine like him and Kurt Vonnegut like at some officer's bar swapping human horror stories that would go into their respective
chain smoking.
Yeah.
Oh God, that would just be so depressing. Actually, because Vonnegut was deeply haunted by it. I assume Serling may have been when he was sober.
Well, I don't know if Serling was a POW like Vonnegut was, because wasn't Slaughterhouse Five based on his own like being caught in Dresden during the firebombing?
Yeah. Serling parlayed a bunch of disparate TV and film writing gigs into his own show, The Twilight Zone, which you may have heard of. It was launched in 1959 and became a hit, scooped up a Peabody Award and 4 Writers Guild Awards during its run. Shortly before his death in 1975, according to Planet of the Apes Revisited, Serling explained, I first became involved with Planet of the Apes about 10 years ago, so 65. Although he, funnily enough, said it was through a production company called King Brothers, and Serling adds, they mostly did Indian elephant pictures shot for about $1.80. I have no idea what that phrase means, so he must have gotten confused. I just thought that was funny. I don't know what Indian elephant pictures were. I guess that's a film where you just get an Indian elephant and go from there. But regardless of who he was approached by, and he did a whole treatment for it. He was called by Blake Edwards, who said not to worry about the money, as the film was going to be a big one.
Serling honed in on the fact that Boole had not written a sci-fi book per se. Serling said in 1972, as talented and creative a man as Boole is, he does not have the deftness of a science fiction writer. Boole's book was a prolonged allegory about morality more than it was a stunning science fiction piece. But it contained within its structure a walloping science fiction idea.
Yeah, it was interesting to me to learn that one of Serling's early episodes of The Twilight Zone, called I Shot an Arrow into the Air, is based around a group of astronauts who turn on each other after crash landing on a planet that in the end is revealed to be Earth.
Oh, yeah, that's right.
And they're just like outside Vegas. Like they literally see like a highway sign that says Vegas or Reno, Vegas, I think, at the end. That's like the big horrifying moment. But yeah, I don't know. Maybe a little bit of self-plagiarism going on there.
But in his initial version of the adaptation, Serling went a little too far. He would later admit as much, saying, my earliest version of the script featured an ape city much like New York. Of course, that was much too expensive to do. He continued, the script was very long, and I think the estimate of the production people was that if they had to shoot that script, it would have cost no less than $100 million. By the time they created an ape population, clothed it, and built a city for them to live in. That's like between $250 and $500 million today.
Yeah.
Serling was also concerned about adapting the tone of Boole's essentially satirical novel into a serious sci-fi film. Now, as soon as you put a shirt and tie on an orangutan, he says, you invite laughter. This is true. But our story is serious satire. Serling would eventually produce 30 drafts of the Planet of the Apes screenplay. This is according to the documentary Behind the Planet of the Apes. 30 drafts. Wow. Would you classify Planet of the Apes as satire?
You know, I personally wouldn't, but I like see why it kind of. I mean, you know, we'll touch later on Sammy Davis Jr.'s interpretation, but I think maybe unintentionally, like most of the creatives in it are people who were products of the 50s system, and it just took so long to get made that they accidentally dropped something into 1968, the most turbulent year of a famously turbulent decade. But like Bull wrote it he was like a, you know, greatest generation. Arthur P. Jacobs was like coming, I mentioned earlier, he was like a Marilyn Monroe era publicist. Heston was certainly more famous, I think, as a leading man through the early part of the decade. And then they just wound up by sort of coincidence making this thing that was a great allegory about class differences and class structures, which they even nod at within the apes, because there's a point where like Cornelius and Zero are talking and they're like, oh, you know how orangutans hate chimps or whatever. So like there is a bit of that is textual, but I think just by virtue of taking so long to get this thing made, it transcended the generation that created it and achieved unintentional resonance with the people who actually saw it. Does that make sense?
Well said, yeah. I mean, I wonder if it's almost like George Romero doing Night of the Living Dead, which became an allegory for racism as well. And although I guess he probably intentionally made some of those scenes look like the black and white footage.
He did not. He did not. The character was not black in the screenplay, and he just cast for the best actor he was able to find. And then later he started saying, oh yeah, it was a civil rights thing. Because George, if anything, knew he was savvy about what that would do.
We're going to take a quick break, but we'll be right back with more Too Much Information in just a moment.
The Planet of the Apes movie, as you said, part of the long gestation period, was Warner Brothers, after years of development, killed the whole thing in January 1965 after taking a long, hard look at the projected budget, which was nearly $7.5 million, which is, I'd say, about close to like $75 million today. Blake Edwards departed, and producer Arthur Jacobs was back at square one. But Jacobs, he was a tenacious bastard. He never gave up. And one of his first moves was to send Rod Serling's draft to the book's author, Pierre Boulle. Boulle did not like the "It was Earth all along" ending, also known as one of the greatest film twists of all time. The man who couldn't keep his twist straight in the book version hated one of the best twist endings ever. Okay.
French.
Yeah. Boulle felt that it cheapened the story, saying that it served as, quote, temptation from the devil. What does that even mean?
I have no idea. French, man.
Producer Arthur Jacobs, however, didn't care and didn't ask Boulle to write a new version of the script to his own novel.
It is just funny. Charlton Heston talks about like the tremendous hustle that Jacobs had as a producer. He was just like, they don't want it, I'm taking it over here. Like, Boulle doesn't want a new screenplay. Great, I'm gonna go lock down Heston. Like, he was just constant. He really believed in this thing, and he was right.
He took the script over to Charlton Heston and attempted to woo him to star as the astronaut, initially called Thomas and later renamed Taylor. And Charlton Heston, I mean, where do you start with him? I mean, he started as a stage actor. He would become a huge name in splashy period dramas like Ben-Hur, The Ten Commandments, and The Warlord, where he eventually worked with the eventual director of Planet of the Apes, Franklin J. Schaffner.
Yeah, I kind of had a negative opinion of Chuck Heston before this. I kind of thought he was like because I only ever knew him from being an NRA advocate.
Yeah.
But he's like quite delightful in the documentary and the book. He kept extensive journals, which are written in very erudite, funny ways. And he really took care of the other people on the set, as we'll talk about. But so I'm like, yeah, good on you, Chuck.
And yeah, like you said, he speaks very admirably of producer Arthur Jacobs. He says in the book Planet of the Apes Revisited that he didn't even know how Jacobs found him. Quote, because I usually didn't accept submissions other than those accompanied by firm, fully funded offers, which of course he was not in the position to make at that point. Heston would eventually ink a deal for $250,000, which again in 1967 was nothing to sneeze at, and 10% of the box office?
There it is.
Is that for just this movie or for the whole franchise?
I don't think it could have been the franchise because he only came back for 2 on the condition that it would be his last one. But still, 10% of the gross of this movie in 68 would have been a chunk of change. It's like coming back to Alec Guinness. It's funny because he thought Star Wars was going to be nothing, so he took like lower scale in exchange for, I think, merchandise rather than back end, and just like lived out the rest of his life on the strength of that decision.
So all of this was still taking place over months without any real development in terms of actually getting this thing made at a studio. Charlton Heston developed a running gag with Jacobs, who would call and say that the project had been killed at MGM, but he was taking it back to Warner, who'd previously killed it, because they have new people over there. This has been taking so long that the turnover rate of executives at all these studios was total.
Heston has this, he writes about it I think he writes about it in his journal, where he's like, Jacobs would call me up and was like, well, it's killed at Fox, but I'm going to take it over to United Artists. And Heston would finish his sentence, because they have new people over there.
Director Franklin J. Schaffner would say, it seemed to me a fascinating project which would never get made. So when Arthur said, would you do it? It was easy to say yes. 2 years later, Arthur called me up and said, we have enough money to do a makeup test. It took him 2 years to get enough money to just do a makeup test.
Yeah, I mean, this was true. Fox executive Richard Zanuck had wisely honed in on the fact that the movie would be made or broken by the makeup or ape-up situation. And eventually, Jacobs and the rest of his crew, associate producer Mort Abrahams, which is such a funny Hollywood guy name, were just constantly begging for money from him. And they eventually got together around $7,500 for a makeup screen test, shot on 35 millimeter on Fox's lot in early 1964. This featured a more elaborate and therefore ultimately unused ape makeup starring Edward G. Robinson as Zaius, along with James Brolin as Cornelius and Kim Taylor, who would play Zero. Edward G. Robinson was so taken aback by the makeup process and also being half dead that he was like, I don't want to do this. And he was replaced later in production by Maurice Evans.
Edward G. Robinson's best known to me for Looney Tunes, basically, because wasn't he in the original Scarface or something? He was like an old gangster movie actor in the 30s and 40s.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know much about him, but he was basically like, my heart will not take it, which is probably fair, actually. The screen test did reveal some shortcomings with the initial makeup design, but it did show that the makeup would hold up under film lights and that the actors' voices would be unaffected. Fox's response was once again to back out, and Jacobs resumed his grind. He hired another writer, Charles Eastman, to punch up some scenes, and the 40 pages that Eastman produced were deemed unusable. And then they turned back to writer Michael Wilson, who, as I mentioned earlier, had been blacklisted as a communist during Joseph McCarthy's Red Scare campaign, and brought that experience into like the trial scenes, for example.
Oh, wow.
Was his way of commenting on that. He'd done uncredited rewrites on Bridge over the River Kwai, Lawrence of Arabia, and won an Oscar for A Place in the Sun. So then Jacobs' associate producer, the aforementioned Mort Abrahams, explained that production continued to eke money out of Fox, like a couple grand at a time, to keep refining the makeup design. Jacobs' associate producer, the aforementioned Mort Abrahams, explained that production continued to eke money out of Fox, like a grand at a time, to keep refining the makeup designs. And ultimately, they made one last Hail Mary pitch. They went back to Dick Zanuck at Fox, who immediately forbade them from bringing up apes. And then undeterred, they bluffed their way into a meeting with a presentation of how well these different sci-fi films have been doing at the box office. And Zanuck said, come back in 4 weeks to see if this is still like a trend that's continuing at the box office. He actually said in their meeting, I give you 3 minutes and this is the last time because I'm really bored with it. So they came back and with the box office trend continuing apace, and he finally greenlit the film at Fox with the provision that they could bring it to around $5 million as its budget.
Production designer William Kreber was tasked with creating the literal titular planet. Which planet was that, Heigl?
Monkey Planet.
He worked on a number of sci-fi properties on TV, like Lost in Space, Voyage to the Bottom of the Sea, and The Time Tunnel, and would eventually go on to the big screen with The Poseidon Adventure and The Towering Inferno. Incredible movies, both. His biggest task was to whittle the sets down from Serling's proposed Ape City to the film's eventual look. He and associate producer Mort Abraham poured through architectural books and stumbled on the Spanish architect Gaudi and his churches, which had nature-inspired forms, a sensibility they combined with the real-life rock-cut architecture of Cappadocia in central Turkey that dated back to the 1st century AD.
Yeah, it's really crazy. Like, if you look at pictures of this region of Turkey, and it's like, it looks like the Planet of the Apes. They're just these kind of like, I don't want to say crude, because they were building like, they had like full buildings and churches and stuff, but they're just hewn out of rock.
I mean, for a production that's trying to keep an eye on its budget, using as a design inspiration Gaudi, the guy who designed the church that took something like 100 and something years to build in Barcelona, La Sagrada Familia, maybe isn't the one you gotta go with.
Well, wait do you explain how they got around that, Jordan?
Okay, all right. Having arrived at a design theme, they decided to spec it out. Wood was initially considered, but that was costly, so they decided on polyurethane foam, which was cheaper and lighter. Head of studio construction Ivan Martin explained to American Cinematographer magazine in 1968, the material is NKC Corofoam, a combination of resin and a catalyst. When these are fired under pressure from a gun, the mix rises like bread dough. Then the heat quickly dissipates, and within 10 minutes it's cold and solid. Using Kreber's designs, they designed the city with thin iron rods, which they'd cover with cardboard and craft paper. They'd spray the whole thing and peel off the paper, leaving them with structures to paint and dress. Not unlike, I'm getting paper mache vibes here, basically.
Yeah, like crude children's structures. Which then they'd paint and
there you go.
Yeah, make look like rock.
The opening sequence of the movie was filmed near Lake Powell, Arizona, and cut together with a man-made pool that was actually reused from Arthur Jacobs' previous production, Dr. Dolittle. Oh, I wonder if they used any like animals or anything from Dr. Dolittle.
Maybe some horses.
Oh, maybe, yeah. And they also filmed at the waterfall at the Fox studio lot. For the scene in which Charlton Heston is being chased by mounted apes,
that's correct.
They literally just grew a field of corn on the Fox Ranch studios.
It's so funny in the movie they talk about like, yeah, we need it to be like about 6 feet high, and they like they grew a field of corn with like fertilizer and water, and it actually went up to 8 feet tall. And they're like, what do we do? And like, I forget if it was the director or Zanuck, but he was like, cut it down to 6 feet. So they grew and trimmed an entire field of corn on the Fox backlot for this.
To me, the Fox backlot, which was this huge expanse of land, I think out by Malibu, was to me best known as the where they shot some of the exteriors for MASH. And I'm sure many other things. Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid, some old Tarzan movies from the 30s. Yeah, I guess those are the big ones. And of course, this brings us to the film's final beach scene, which was filmed on a stretch of California seacoast between Malibu and Oxnard with 130-foot cliffs. It was so inaccessible that the cast, crew, film equipment, and yes, even the horses had to be lowered in by helicopter.
And mules. They took a lot of mules out there.
The remains of the Statue of Liberty were shot in a secluded cove on the far eastern end of Westward Beach in Malibu between Zuma Beaches and Point Doom. And that's also where the end of Barton Fink and Whatever Happened to Baby Jane was filmed, as well as bits of Airplane, I believe.
That's a storied location.
Yeah, weird energy in that location. Costumes were coming together thanks to the awesomely named Morton Hawk, who quickly abandoned the idea of having the apes dressed in suits or dresses. because that just would have been hilarious. He suggested grouping the apes by clothing color instead. Chimps in green, orangutans in brownish orange, and gorillas in black. Associate producer Morton Abraham recalled, Bill must have submitted 50 to 75 drawings. Thankfully, he was working on these designs as the set was still coming together, which, helped him kind of craft the colors of the outfits to the colors and textures of the set.
Yes. The real star of this department was John Chambers, ultimately the first person ever awarded a special Oscar just for makeup. Chambers was a jewelry designer and carpenter before he joined the Army and wound up as a dental technician. While enlisted, he developed a new line of adhesives and rubber compounds, which ultimately ended up in the service of creating prosthetic devices for those wounded in war. Haunted by the cost of dealing so intimately with another person's tragedy, he turned to the television industry for respite, which was an error. It was in this capacity that he first worked with Heston, transforming him into the Beast for a Shirley Temple production of Beauty and the Beast. Just imagine craggy, lantern-jawed Chuck Heston romancing sort of Shirley Temple gives me a deep chill. Chambers also worked on a huge swath of the 50s and 60s sci-fi boom on TV, Outer Limits. He crafted Spock's ears on Star Trek.
Whoa.
Worked on The Munsters, Lost in Space, The Invaders, and Rod Serling's Night Gallery. My favorite quote in this piece is that he was set to go to London and research the ape makeup that Stanley Kubrick was using to film 2001: A Space Odyssey.
Oh.
Though Kubrick backed out of the arrangement, he was famously weird and secretive and concerned that this might have been a conflict of interest. Chambers, for his part, responded thusly, I backed out of the whole idea as a personal affront. I'm an Irishman, and I said, anytime an Englishman can teach me anything, it's going to be a cold day in hell. Chambers was tackling the ape makeup from an unusual, if iconic, source, Jack Dawn's Cowardly Lion makeup for Burt Lair in Wizard of Oz, which allowed Lair to still make his trademark comical facial expression based on how the appliance was mounted to his face. Chambers said, to arrive at our final concept, we turned to sculpturing. We would take a base human head in plaster and then in clay, model on this head our ape variations. We came up with how things looked like the Neanderthal man and so forth, which we discarded. The concepts were too ambiguous. We needed the pleasantness, yet the strength of the animal without being too grotesque. The set designer in the documentary says that one day he came into the makeup department and they had just a live chimp there hanging out to model it on. Chambers' practical concerns for the makeup were twofold. One, that the mask wouldn't muffle the actors' voices, which meant using material light enough to let it escape from under the makeup. And two, that the makeup's lips were synchronized with the actors. So they had to glue the inside of the prosthesis directly to their lips and jaw muscles so that the outside of the mask would wrinkle and crease realistically. And then they had to make the whole thing visually appealing as well. Chambers said that they had to modify the sort of wrinkle structure that go into apes' faces to make them not just look like horrifyingly aged humans. And the fact that their nose structure looked like giant slits in the middle of their face. So seeing that enlarged to a talking human scale would have been similarly horrifying. So they smallished them down. Jesus.
I mean, I wonder if there was any consideration to the fact that, you were paying top dollar for decent level stars. You didn't want to completely obscure their faces entirely.
Yeah. One of the funniest bits in the documentary was them talking about how they quickly learned that you couldn't keep your face still in a scene. Like if the camera was on you, they would kind of have to be constantly moving their face around in these weird over exaggerated contortions, so that would translate through the makeup, and the makeup wouldn't just look like a still static mask. So Roddy McDowall and Kim Hunter talk about just making these comical faces underneath all the makeup, and then when it translates through the makeup, it just happens to look like expressions of interest or what have you. And they eventually landed on a multi-piece latex appliance for the forehead, nose, mouth, and chin, and then they plastered the whole thing together. They made individual molds of the various parts of each lead actor's face and built multiple latex appliances from them. And this is really the big revolution that was taking place in makeup around this time. Dick Smith was doing this with Little Big Man, where instead of just doing these big one-piece appliances, the solution was to do many small pieces that were individually placed according to like facial muscles so that you could get as much individual movement out of it. And now they just do it in a computer. They couldn't use the same ones twice because the liquid latex bonded to the foam rubber underside of it, and that tore easily and was damaged easily. And the groups of apes in the film, each group of apes in the film's makeup was designed to highlight character traits. The chimps were supposed to look sympathetic and kind of cherubic. The gorillas' makeup was actually, they made the gorillas look meaner than they do in real life. And the orangutans had this, naturally, as in the real animal, have this kind of aristocratic bearing. Actors came to the makeup trailer before dawn and had the makeup appliances placed over their faces, covered in a cream inside to protect them from the spirit gum that glued these things to the actors, because the spirit gum was so concentrated at this point. It was like both abrasive to sensitive skin and would like, the fumes would like get them, you know, somewhat high as they were working on it. Once the appliance was in place, Chambers used grease paint to blend the mask with the actor's skin and applied the wig, which was a set of sideburns on the face and a bald cap with a wig glued to it over their natural hair. They then got rubber ears and false teeth, and then their natural teeth were painted black so that they wouldn't show up on camera. Given the amount of apes on the film, which included like up to 200 for some group scenes, Chambers whittled down the total amount of time to apply the makeup from 6 hours to a slightly more reasonable 3.5. Frequently in the run-up to this movie, it was crowed that they spent like $1 million on makeup alone, but Abraham said it was closer to half that. So
that's like $5 million today.
Yeah, I was going to say, still an egregious amount of money for monkey makeup.
At this point in the production, they only had Charlton Heston locked down. Jeez. So they spent all this time developing this makeup and they had no idea who they were going to put it on.
Essentially, yeah.
Great. They filled the role of Zira with Kim Hunter, who'd had a promising career in Hollywood, starring opposite Marlon Brando in the Broadway and feature film version of A Streetcar Named Desire, before being blacklisted by McCarthy.
Running theme here.
Yeah. Apes producer Arthur Jacobs actually helped get her off the blacklist through some weird back channels. Do you have any further info on that?
She has this long anecdote in the book about the films where she basically says, like, Jacobs got a call from someone that was like, if you cast Kim Hunter, you'll never work in this industry again, like trying to threaten him out of casting her and keep her on the blacklist. And they eventually got into some kind of like pseudo extortion scheme where they like found the master keeper of the blacklist. And the guy was like, you have to pay me $200 to find out the reason you're on this. And it just turned into this whole like Byzantine, this is like a page-long story in the book. It's like the most Kim Hunter talks. And it was this whole Byzantine thing that took place over like phone calls and letters and this whole like shadowy weird thing where this guy was trying to get money out of them to like pull her off the blacklist or even reveal the reason that she'd been blacklisted in the first place. And she wound up off it and acting in this movie. And what a hell of a career. You go from friggin' opposite Brando in Streetcar to monkey makeup.
You got to claw your way back from the blacklist somehow.
Yeah.
I don't think I realized there was an actual literal list that was kept by presumably a guy.
I mean, it has to be like locked in McCarthy's, like it was like locked in McCarthy's cupboard somewhere. And this guy just found it and was like, I can squeeze $200 out of these Hollywood rubes.
God. Kim Hunter had not read Boole's original book when she was cast, and ultimately did not, hoping to avoid picking up anything in the book that wouldn't appear on screen, which, as we discussed earlier, it was a lot. Roddy McDowall was cast next. Everybody loves Roddy McDowall. Good friend of Elizabeth Taylor and certain circle of Hollywood women. He was famous for throwing dinner parties, and after he died, his very famous bathroom in his home was placed in a museum.
Huh.
Yeah.
Yeah, I just remember him from Fright Night, the 80s movie where he plays like a horror movie presenter who masquerades as a vampire hunter, and then they enlist him to be an actual vampire hunter. He's great in it. Anyway.
Yes, the Hollywood History Museum at the Max Factor Studio is preserved for future generations to enjoy. You can use Roddy McDowall's bathroom. I enjoyed this. I went. I paid money to go there.
I was going to say, you've gone. I trust.
I have gone. Yes, I have. It's very good. Anyway, Roddy McDowall was cast as Zira's fiance, Cornelius. Incidentally, no one in production cared whether the apes would have consistent accents or not. They were just so burnt out on the makeup. They're like, "Just talk however you want. I don't just
I don't give a shit.
Let's just get this going."
They're asking me about the accents now.
Frank Schaffner and I talked about an ape with an English accent for about 30 seconds. This is Roddy McDowall talking, and we thought, no,
this is Mort Abrahams.
Associate producer Martin Abraham said, Frank Schaffner and I talked about an ape with an English accent for about 30 seconds, and we thought, no, Roddy McDowall would be so good and nobody's going to pay any attention to the accent.
And they were right.
An ape with an English accent's pretty hilarious.
It is naturally funny. It seems like it should have been like a bigger cornerstone of British comedy. Like their whole thing was cross-dressing, but they really could have gotten so much more mileage out of
species dressing.
Species dressing, yeah, ape dressing. I was trying to make a drag ape thing, but it didn't really work, so just move on. Oh yeah, I don't know who they were looking for after Edward G. Robinson was like, "I will literally die if you put me in this makeup for an entire film shoot." Oh God. And then he clung on for like another 20 years. But they landed Maurice Evans, another British guy, who became an American citizen right as World War II was hopping up. And then he started appearing in plays and TV roles throughout the 50s. I don't know anything else about this guy.
I mean, this is making me think of in The Wizard of Oz, the Tin Man, when they almost killed Buddy Ebsen, the original Tin Man.
Oh, yeah, by just painting him with actual silver paint.
Yeah, that just like coated his lungs, and he was like, "Oh, I'm gonna die.
I will die. Put me in an oxygen tent."
Yeah, and then not only did they almost kill him, they took his role away and learned from their mistake and gave Ray Bolger, I think. No, he was
gave the new guy a less deadly makeup treatment. I did Maurice Evans dirty here. He was in Bewitched, playing a character named Maurice. But he had done a bunch of stuff in the Old Vic. He was like peers with Olivier. Oh, he's in Rosemary's Baby.
Oh yeah,
he's like one of the neighbor. He's one of the good neighbors. All right, good for you, Maurice Evans. I was not familiar with your game.
Getting back to the Tin Man for a minute, the part actually went to Jack Haley, not Roy Bolger. And that's interesting to me because Jack Haley's son, Jack Haley Jr., married Liza Minnelli, who's Judy Garland's daughter. So the daughter of Dorothy and the daughter of the Tin Man got married in real life for like 90 days in the Studio 54 era. Is that weird?
Interesting. I think it smacks of like arranged marriage, which I sort of hate. But sure.
Or trauma bonding.
Yeah, that's the more likely explanation.
Oh, sorry. They lasted from 74 to 79. I take it back.
Oh, it's not bad.
In Liza realm, that's a long marriage. Where the hell are we? Oh. The ape actors, that's another inherently funny term, found themselves in the similar straits of not being able to figure out how to play a humanoid ape. McDowall said he based some of his ape movements on Groucho Marx. And took it to Kim Hunter. They also took a trip to the zoo, which they found very quickly was not that helpful. McDowall said, the characters we were playing were much more evolved than the ones you see in the zoo. Yeah, they talk. That's why I hit upon the idea of the sort of crouch and using the knees. It's very, very tiring to stand that way.
This next part kills me because...
Oh, you take this.
Well, poor Kim Hunter did not have a good time making this movie. McDowall thought he would be affected because he was slightly claustrophobic. He said he didn't even like the idea of having a pillow over his face, so he was unsure of how he would cope with the makeup. But he got to the point where he could just sleep through the whole thing, while Kim Hunter had to take a Valium to sit through it. And similarly, they had different reactions the first time they appeared on set in makeup. Mort Abraham said that McDowall came onto set and just acted like a chimp for 15 minutes, letting his arms dangle at his sides and scratching his armpits. He put his tongue underneath his upper lip and started making jabbering noises while jumping with 2 feet. Meanwhile, Kim Hunter approached Mort Abrahams on the set and broke down in tears in his arms for 10 minutes.
Which
Abrahams said pretty much ruined the makeup. Yeah, poor Kim Hunter is just like, she talks about like having like ego death. Because in this specific moment, she was walking with another actress, and when Abrahams greeted her, he was like, "Hey, I'm sorry, I don't know which one of you is Kim Hunter," and she just like broke down into tears at the enormity of that statement. And then later would have she would like go to her trailer and have these like horrifying existential moments where she was like she would dream that she was an ape. It's just like, come on, lady.
The making of this seems like a French existentialist novel.
Especially the outside parts where they were just like out in the middle of Arizona. It was like 110 degrees. Not much interesting about Linda Harrison, who plays the human lady Nova. Might not be surprising for you to learn that she was Richard Zanuck's then girlfriend, and he was the head of Fox at the time, and she was cast at his suggestion. They shot and subsequently cut a scene, though, in which she was revealed to be pregnant by Taylor. And then they cut that out of fear that they were pushing things too far. They were like, wow, we've already got an ape movie that'll be, thinly veiled allegory for racism and class in America. Let's keep abortion out of it. Kim Hunter remembers the following about Harrison. I remember her in relation to the Valium I used to take to relax because of the makeup. She asked what my strength was. It was 5 milligrams or whatever. And she said, oh my God, that little? I never go to sleep without 10 at least. I guess when you're sleeping next to Dick Zanuck.
They got married.
Good for them. How long?
9 years.
Oh, it was okay. Okay. What else did she even do?
Something about Batman?
Okay.
Oh, she was cheerleader number 2 on the Batman series. So, yes, technically something with Batman.
Man, banging Dick Zanuck only gets you 2 roles in Fox movies.
Oh, she was Woman in Cart in Tim Burton's remake of Planet of the Apes.
Okay.
Oh, she was in Cocoon.
Oh,
and Cocoon the Return. Cocoon Harder. A good day to Cocoon. Back in the Cocoon.
Back in the Cocoon, yeah. I feel like we should start using Beneath as a sequel construction. Sister Act 2, Beneath the Habit? Beneath the Planet of the Sister Act? Anyway.
Beneath the Die Hard.
The film immediately got behind Beneath the Die Hard.
Beneath the
is good.
Speed.
As you meditate on that, we'll be right back with more Too Much Information after these messages. The film immediately got behind schedule on its first day of shooting, which was at the Grand Canyon and the desert surrounding Page, Arizona, because A, Heston was the only person quite sensibly pushing for beards on the astronaut when they were woken up to indicate the passage of time, and they had not packed beards, even though he grew his own. And B, all the ape makeup had been left in Phoenix, where they landed before taking a puddle jumper to Page. So then they had to charter a separate plane to take them from Page to Phoenix to pick up the makeup that they had left behind and then go back to Page. The makeup became like an army that they had to feed throughout the entire shoot. I mentioned earlier that there were up to 200 apes that needed makeup in some of these different group scenes. And there was an 80-person strong team dedicated to maintaining the makeup appliances, hair, and wardrobe, which actually caused a ripple delay through Hollywood as other productions couldn't hire qualified makeup artists because everyone else was working on apes. The makeup was put above virtually everything else, including the actors. Actors had to use cigarette holders and subsisted on liquid diets through a straw. And then when they did eat solid food, they had to eat staring at themselves in a mirror so they could guide the food past the appliance and into their mouth.
That's the most horrifying part of this entire ordeal that you've described, is this watching yourself intently eat.
Yeah, as an ape.
Yeah, as an ape, yeah. No wonder Kim Hunter had ego death.
The early astronaut sequences were shot around Lake Paulo on the Colorado River in Utah and Arizona, a spot that NASA deemed, along with nearby Glen Canyon, as the closest representation of the lunar surface that could be found on Earth, which should interest you as a space guy.
I was going to say, very much so. Although, I mean, yeah, there's a lot of rocks here. Yeah, that works.
Yeah, I mean, it's either this or what's the famous one in Utah? It's like a red rocks thing that always stands in for Mars.
Oh, yeah. I forget what it's called, but I know what you mean.
Apes was also the first time that the government allowed anything to be shot near Glen Canyon Dam, which supplied power to most of the Southwest. It was desolate and extremely hot. Jeff Burton, who played the astronaut Dodge, fainted at one point. And given these circumstances, it may shock you to learn that the mummified corpse of the dead astronaut that they find in stasis was a real woman and not a model. Heston later quipped, "It has to be the only 70-year-old woman who ever played an astronaut."
Pause for applause.
Yeah. They got into an early stalemate with Fox over the amount of time that director Franklin J. Schaffner was spending shooting the landscape there. Like, basically, Zanuck was like, "I will not give you another day to shoot this landscape." And they just kept begging, "We need more shots of the landscape." Because they just wanted to showcase that and really build up to the discovery of the apes. And that opening scene is incredible. There's this amazing moment where they're hiking over a horizon, and they get the lens flare from the setting sun is actually like a halo effect around one of the actors, and the camera follows him in such a way that the lens flare also follows with him, and he remains enclosed in it. Whether it was luck or intentional, it's one of the more incredible shots I've seen. Because you can also do lens flares digitally now, as
oh, really?
yeah, as that fail son, what's his name? Oh, J.J. Abrams. Eagerly reminds us every time he gets behind a camera.
He's a fail son?
He's famous. His uncle was like an exec or something. And he's not a fail son. He's made tremendously financially successful properties. I just think he's a hack. They also ran into, let's say, a cultural issue with rounding up extras from Page. The problem was that all of the women of the nearby town were concerned about leaving their homes to act in the movie while their Native American housekeepers were in their houses. One of them finally said, "You don't understand, Mr. Abrahams, because you've never been around Indians. You just can't trust these people as far as you can throw them." This woman went into an explanation of Indians, and I thought to myself, I'm in Mississippi in 1935. Producer Mort Abrahams remembered. You can't walk around Page without seeing Indians. They live all over the place. It was originally Indian land. But the people of Page had this terribly racist attitude.
Great.
Grim. Yeah.
How
you thought
fitting,
we would escape it.
Fitting for that production, I guess, though.
I know, right?
You know.
Yeah.
Eventually getting over that with some creative scheduling, they moved on to battling the oppressive heat faced by the actors in makeup, which Charlton Heston helped by requesting a helicopter for the cast to get back and forth from the Fox Ranch to Arizona. As the head of the Screen Actors Guild at the time, Charlton Heston was also able to push the studio to pay the actors for time they spent in the makeup chair, not just for shooting hours. Wow.
Isn't that interesting?
Yeah.
They used to they would consider your day that's start and end in front of the camera. And even if you were doing 3 hours in a makeup chair, or an hour and a half to remove it afterwards, they were like, nope. And I mean, Chuck is also, he's pretty self-aggrandizing, as you would expect from someone who played Moses. But he suggests that it was the first time that he was like, this film was instrumental in getting that changed. So good on him.
I mean, that's just got to be wild being an actor on the set with the head of the Screen Actors Guild. Like,
I know, right? Like,
nice.
Yeah.
Kick back, hang out at craft services a little longer than I maybe ordinarily would have. They were also constantly revising the actor's technique under the makeup. Kim Hunter remembers director Frank Schaffner, after seeing some dailies, telling them, "You've really got to keep those facial muscles moving. Otherwise, whenever the camera's on you and you're absolutely immobile or at ease, listening as people do without moving a muscle, it looks like a mask. When the camera is on you, you've got to be conscious of keeping it moving." Roddy McDowall would, when the shoot moved to the Fox studios, sometimes get driven home with his full makeup on, obviously scaring the other drivers out of their minds.
I think Abrahams says in the documentary that a bunch of the guerrilla actors did that once too, where they were just like, they were literally driving, and there was 4 of them in like an Oldsmobile driving down PCH.
Oh, God.
Which must have been really one of the joys of being on this movie, is tripping out people in your ape makeup.
Roddy McDowall also snuck onto the stage where Julie Andrews was shooting the movie Star and crawled into her dressing room on all fours, dressed as an ape, scaring the hell out of her. That's amazing. Only Roddy McDowall could pull that off.
Yeah. Can you? Oh my God. I would have lost my if it was like in mid-60s and a chimp crawled into my dressing room. I probably would have shot him.
Maybe that was why Charlton Heston got involved in the NRA.
Ape protection against apes. He glimpsed the future and was deeply worried by what glimpsed back. Gotta do something about these apes. Do you remember the VH1 like 100 shocking moments of rock and roll when it was like the body count cop killer coming out and they just kept running that clip of Heston reading the lyrics out loud, being like,
die, die, die.
die, 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 pig, die.
I was trying to remember like why I had that in my head. It was absolutely from that. Yep. As you note, somewhat creepily, the actors on the set began flocking to their own respective ape groups, age groups. I don't know if that was an intentional pun or an actual typo. Charlton Heston said, in a sort of unfortunate choice of words, it was an instinctive segregation on set. Not only would the apes eat together, but the chimpanzees ate with the chimpanzees, and the gorillas ate with the gorillas. The orangutans also ate with the orangutans, and the humans would eat off by themselves. It was quite spooky. A contested bit of the film is shot at Taylor's trial, where the orangutans make the see, hear, speak no evil signs, which was a spur-of-the-moment bit of on-set improv. Some people felt that it derailed the otherwise serious tone of the film, but Dick Zanuck and Arthur Jacobs, also known as the guys who held the purse strings for this movie, both battled for its inclusion. Kim Hunter and Roddy McDowall, however, hated it, and Charlton Heston also wasn't a fan, but he caved to the test audiences who loved the bit. What do you think?
I think it's funny. I mean, they might linger on it for a beat or two too long, but it is funny. It's like probably the purest moment of comedy, intentional comedy. It is the purest moment of intentional comedy in the film. I think it's fine. No? You disagree?
Considering this whole movie is veering way too close to, comedy at all times, I think you got to really commit to the bit and keep it straight-faced.
Yeah, I see that. I do see that. The test audiences loved it, though. So, what are you going to do? The people have spoken.
Spoken like a true cigar-chomping executive.
Apes was important to remember that it was a total inversion of Heston's image at the time. He was always playing these, with that jaw and that barrel chest. He was always playing leaders and heroes. And in this movie, he's just absolutely bodied by ape after ape after ape. He would later remember, I didn't realize until we got into it that almost throughout the whole picture, people were chasing me or throwing things at me or hitting me with sticks or hosing me with water or pushing me around or tying me up. I was constantly being mistreated. I had done a lot of pictures on horses and driven chariots and parted the Red Sea. A horse or a chariot, and you're an important person. Here, I'm being chased by monkeys, for God's sakes. And believe me, even rubber rocks hurt.
Oh.
In his journal, he notes his stunt double on the film, a guy named Joe Cannett, after a long day of this treatment, quipped to him, Chuck, I remember when we used to win these fights.
Oh, man. That's like a cut line from Once Upon a Time in Hollywood. That's good.
Oh, yeah. And in the ultimate indignity, they made little flesh-looking booties for Heston to wear while running around the set and dirt paths because his character was ostensibly barefoot. And he actually got the flu from the sort of what we mentioned on the thing of the kind of constant yin yang of being outside in boiling heat and then like in an air conditioned setting. And he got the flu right before he was supposed to film the Damn Dirty Ape line. And that's why his voice sounds absolutely like shot. And it's not just that he's like putting his full chest of like disgust and bile into it. It's that his voice was like physically run ragged. He also, what's also really funny to me, what this film historian points out in the documentary, is that this was like the first serious film that had apes in it since like King Kong and Mighty Joe Young, because like once they had developed the gorilla suit, it quickly became just an object of comedy, like Benny Hill running around in a gorilla suit and like all these B movies that were made like Gorilla at Large, which weirdly enough starred Raymond Burr and Anne Bancroft. So this movie was really, quintessential in restoring cinematic dignity to the mighty ape.
Raymond Burr as in Perry Mason?
Yeah.
I guess he kind of seems like
he would track down an ape.
I mean, I'm incapable of determining whether or not a movie with a gorilla in it is supposed to be a comedy. Or...
Lee Marvin was in it. So was Lee Cobb, who Lee J. Cobb was in On the Waterfront, and he originated the role of Willie Loman. That's why I know that name.
What is the prestige drama to gorilla movie pipeline?
I know, right? Yeah, and Cameron Mitchell had appeared in the movie adaptation of Death of a Salesman. And Bancroft, of course, went on to win an Academy Award for Miracle Worker. The gorilla was played by George Barrows, who was actually a gorilla suit specialist. If you can believe it or not. He often is. This is the first draft of his wiki article. He often wore a gorilla suit for his film roles. Excluding his gorilla roles, Barrows usually played bit parts in films and was rarely credited for his work. Oh, he built his own gorilla suit for Gorilla at Large.
That's how to make sure. That's how to future-proof yourself. Build your own gorilla suit.
He also played a gorilla in an episode of The Incredible Hulk. Yeah, oh my God. A gorilla in the movie Hillbillies in a Haunted Place. Baby gorilla in... Baby the gorilla in The Man from U.N.C.L.E.
Beverly Hills.
A gorilla in the Beverly Hills... I'm not done. A gorilla in the Beverly Hills Billies. A gorilla in the Addams Family. A character called Monstro the Godzilla in the 1966 film The Ghost in the Invisible Bikini.
Oh, that's a classic beach party movie.
Yeah, that's the last of the AIP beach party films. Yeah, it seems like that's when he really doubled down on the gorilla thing.
I mean, wouldn't you?
I sure would. You're known as the gorilla guy?
Get me the gorilla guy!
I've had enough with your cheap second string non-union gorillas. Get me George Barrows. A gorilla-shaped phone lights up in his house, where he's been sitting motionless, like Putty in Seinfeld, just like alone and motionless in his apartment. The ape phone lights up, and he turns toward it, and he's like, "At last, a reason."
He's in the entire gorilla suit except for the head.
Yeah, pulls the loaded gun out of his mouth. I'm sure he was a lovely man.
What sound does the gorilla phone make?
You're not going to get me to do a monkey impression on this. Although it is, well, I'll talk about that later. There were a few different versions of the Statue of Liberty scene being bandied around. Apparently, quite a few people involved in production thought that Taylor should have been wounded by the apes in a final confrontation and just die in front of the Statue of Liberty after his big moment, which I think would have enhanced the film.
Like a pietà, yeah.
Yeah, just it'd be better if he was cradled by an ape in front of the Statue of Liberty. Like Zero. Yeah.
Oh, actually, that kind of, I agree with you. That's a better ending.
Come on. It's funny because Heston refers to it as the speech that I wrote, and actually had to battle for the use of God to stay in there. He made an edge case that it wasn't being used as the profanity, damn, but as his character Taylor literally imploring God to damn all of humanity to hell. I mentioned Heston's journal earlier, and it is so hilarious. He describes the weather one morning thusly. The fog didn't creep in on little cat feet. It squatted sullenly on the sand all morning. That sounds like something out of a Good Day for Banana Fish or something.
Wow. Yeah.
In the documentary Behind the Planet of the Apes, we see how the shot of the half-buried statue was achieved. They basically just blended a matte painting with the existing rock structures for the far shots, but they also wanted to have an anticipatory shot that would be seen from the POV of the statue, essentially, as Taylor and Nova approach on horseback. So what they did there was just build a 70-foot scaffold. Oh, again, this is over the beach and the cliffs and the ocean. And then they built a half-scale papier-mâché model of the Statue of Liberty's head and just shot the camera angled downwards above it. I think it was Jacobs who said in the documentary, he was like, we built this whole thing, and my first AD or the cinematography guy was like, I'm nearing 70, I'm not getting up on that thing. And then like 3 other people refused to do it. So it just came down to Frank Schaffner and I think Dick Jacobs on top of this 70-foot scaffold. Our man Jerry Goldsmith turned in the score of Planet of the Apes. Score is pretty standard orchestral stuff, big orchestral things inspired by like Stravinsky and Bartok, but it's notable for its use of bizarre percussion instruments. They used like metal mixing bowls and lots of different ethnic percussion, liberally treated with echoplex. You can hear this best during the chase scenes, the chase scene early on where it's like ping, bong, like all these different very weird percussion stuff. And that was because they had a guy named Emil Richards, who is like one of the most legendary percussionists in of time, I guess. He played with Charles Mingus and George Shearing. He toured with George Harrison, recorded with Frank Sinatra, Frank Zappa, Doris Day, Judy Garland, Steely Dan, and Sarah Vaughan. And this is what's really interesting. He was interested in pitched percussion, and so he subsequently spent time with Harry Partch, who is this insane outsider figure in 20th century music. Partch was concerned with working outside of the Western tempered scale, which Alex's music theory wonk corner. The way that our standard 8-tone scale works is by squashing the frequency ratios that naturally occur with certain frequencies, right? Like they're in non-tempered tuning, they're even ratios, right? And then going back to Pythagoras, he invented this tuning system where the intervals between the frequencies are made uneven. They're like 3-2 instead of... So what that essentially does is cram too many notes into the 7 tones of the major scale, the root through 7 and then the octave. And so a bunch of different guys from Harry Partch on were like, no, that's not the way this should sound. And that's what just intonation is a tuning system in which you get an instrument and adjust its mechanisms to be able to play outside of this tempered scale. And on a guitar, you have to move the frets around. On a piano, you have to retune it. You can technically do it on a fretless instrument. Like you could technically play with just intonation on a fretless instrument. But Harry Partch and early experimenters with this just had to build their own instruments. Partch had this one thing built out of like trash and tuned bits of metal that could play a scale of 43 tones. And he was also homeless for most of his life. He would literally hobo around America with his like collection of instructions for how to build his instruments and how to maintain these systems. And Emil Richards just hung out with this guy. Richards' other credits include the bongos on the theme song for Mission Impossible. He finger snapped on the Addams Family theme, and that is him playing xylophone in the theme to The Simpsons. I just love that. I love how much work and varied experience that these session guys could get in their careers. Some of the ape sounds that you hear in the score are played by a Brazilian instrument called a cuica, which is a pitched drum that has like a rod basically inserted through the bottom and up into the backside of the drum head. And by pushing on this rod and rubbing the drum head, you can create these weird pitch variances in the tone of the drum. And the way it's used in Brazilian music is as percussively, and you can hear it. American audiences can best hear it in Me and Julio Down by the Schoolyard. So all of the little in the background of Me and Julio are this instrument, the cuica, and they used it in Planet of the Apes to make like ape hooting sound effects that they mix into the chase scene. Anyway, Alex's sound theory corner over.
Your interpretation of the cuica is so much better than Me and Julio Down by the Schoolyard. I'm probably just going to leave it with that.
There's a great live Miles set at Isle of Wight. It was filmed really beautifully, and it's with like a combination of the Bitches Brew and some of the other bands that Miles had around the time. It's Chick Corea, Jack DeJohnette, Keith Jarrett, Dave Holland is on bass, Gary Bartz is playing soprano sax, and Erto Moriera, who is a percussionist with Return to Forever, actually. His wife sang on the Return to Forever, some of the Return to Forever stuff, is playing a cuica at one point, and it's like you kind of have to like fist it because like the drum it's hollow on its bottom, and that's where this rod gets inserted. So you have like a wet rag or something to like scrape along the drum head as you're like rhythmically sort of penetrating this thing. It's deeply bizarre, and he is heavily on acid in that performance. It's really a funny thing to watch. There's different close-ups of him where he's clearly like watching things that are not actually there. Great performance. Everyone look up Miles live at the Isle of Wight.
As the actors prepared for the tedious task of looping, which is re-recording dialogue filmed live that was deemed unsuitable in the final print, they were all surprised to learn that the ape makeup actually hadn't stifled that much of their dialogue after all. Though the few lines they did have to redo meant they had to partially re-ape up again in order to make sure their voice would sound consistent. Actually, Charlton Heston and the astronauts were the ones who had to do the most post-production dubbing because, as Heston himself contends, Apes was the first movie to use radio mics, and the quality of the new technology wasn't good enough. One other dubbing story, the actor who played Julius, Buck Cartillion, actually wound up having to dub his entire role over again, which sucks.
He's the ape who's smoking a cigar.
Yeah. He had to dub his entire role over again because the studio had overdubbed him with 5 or 6 other actors, decided none of them worked, and went back to Buck. Why did they do that?
I guess they found him unintelligible or like something. I mean, they wanted to redub his whole performance, which happens. Like Mel Gibson's whole performance in the first Mad Max is overdubbed by an American guy.
I didn't know that.
It's just funny to me that they did this like 4 or 5 times and they were like, yeah, we can't find anything better. Get Buck to go in and redo his entire part that we surely had erased by this time.
When the film was released in the spring of 1968, it immediately became a hit. Pauline Kael called it, quote, one of the most entertaining science fiction fantasies to ever come out of Hollywood in her New Yorker review, and Roger Ebert gave it 3 out of 4 stars, calling it, very understated review, much better than I expected it to be. It is quickly paced, completely entertaining, and the philosophical pretensions don't get in the way. That was an early review, 68. You forget how long he's been
Yeah, it was
in
when
the game.
he was at the Sun-Times then.
Wow. Audiences agreed with Roger Ebert. The film was a box office hit, earning a lifetime domestic gross of $33.3 million and was nominated for 2 Oscars, Best Costume and Best Score, aside from John Chambers' special one for makeup. It lost to both competitive Oscars, though. That's sad. But due to its release in the most turbulent year of a very turbulent era, it gained a level of allegory that baffled its creators, who were clued in by none other than Sammy Davis Jr. Sammy Davis
I
Jr.
love this.
It's like the 1968 equivalent of What's Jaw Think?
Well, I mean, yes, I understand the bit that you're referencing, but they didn't go to him. They read the fucking line.
No, I know the story. Producers,
how dare you short sell sweet Sammy Davis
I
Jr.
love Sammy
Compare
Davis
him to
Jr.
Ja Rule. Have you ever seen Sammy Davis drum or sing?
or dance or do anything.
Yeah, Ja Rule looks like a putz compared to him.
I mean, Ja Rule is a putz compared to him.
Ja Rule's a putz, probably, period. But yeah.
Wasn't denigrating Sammy. It was just not the person I would have thought for pop cultural criticism.
You just watch how Sammy Davis Jr.'s name comes out of your bitch ass mouth.
Producers,
You want to keep sucking eggs through that pie hole. What did Frank Sinatra say? Or else it's curtains for you guys.
It's a ring-a-ding-ding for you, bozos. You'd better knock it with that Sammy punk.
Only I get to say bad things about Sammy.
Friend of the pod, Sammy Davis Jr. We bestow upon you a posthumous honor of friend of the pod.
He wins the greatest posthumous honor anyone ever could. We see you, Sammy, and we wish better for you.
Okay.
Anyway.
Getting back, how Sammy Davis Jr. clued in the producers to the deeper meaning of Planet of the Apes. Producers Arthur P. Jacobs and Mort Abrams were at a restaurant in London where Sammy was already eating. He knew Arthur Jacobs, and he came over to the pair to enthusiastically sing the film's praises, ending with, "And it's the best statement film of the relationship between blacks and whites that I've ever seen on film." Jacobs' immediate reaction, he recalled, was, "I didn't know what the hell he was talking about." He assumed that we were conscious of this as an allegorical treatment of the relationship between blacks and whites. It never occurred to any of us. Really?
I mean, I don't think they had, other than the astronaut, I'm not sure if they had a single black person on the set.
Wow.
Yeah.
Good work, guys. That's one of the stronger arguments for diversity in the workplace I've ever heard.
Yeah. I took out this really awful thing from Chambers where he was like,
The makeup guy?
yeah.
Yeah.
At some point, it was mentioned that all of his makeup tests were done on Asian people. And he was like, I mean, I just did it that way because they have such small noses and big eyes. And apparently he said that the head of the NAACP who was an actor, like came to him at one point and was like, you know, why aren't you hiring more black people for this film, or had heard that there's this big budget thing that black people were not being hired for. And Chambers was like, I just need guys with small noses. And then he phrases it as something, there's a quote from him in the book where he's like, and I made a promise to the guy. I just wanted to say, if there's any black out there who has a problem with this, you know, he can come right to me. And I don't want to offend blacks at all. It's just like kept digging himself deeper.
And I'll get that thing that they used. I'll do that thing they used to measure phrenology, and I'll measure his nose right there and there.
It's like the skull. I just use skull calipers. I took that all out, but it's just really funny when you think of the racial implications of this movie, that the makeup artist was just so tin-eared about that. Thanks to its endless succession of sequels, the film lodged in the pop consciousness for long enough to become a permanent cultural touchstone. And in 2001, the same year of Tim Burton's misbegotten reboot, the original was selected for preservation in the mother trucking United States National Film Registry by the Library of Congress for being, quote, culturally, historically, or aesthetically significant. I just get so hyped on the United States National Film Registry by the Library of Congress.
Have you ever gone to the Library of Congress? I feel like we should make a field trip.
No, I haven't. I'm an avid user of its rights-free photo collections and design things. They have an incredible archive online that is just like free to use. And some of the photos are so fascinating. Anyway.
One of our album covers was from there, right? If not several.
Yeah. At least two of them. Yeah. Anyway, obviously Hollywood couldn't leave this thing simply there, having made all this money, and talk of a sequel quickly picked up. Eventually, they also made a TV show, an animated series, plus the 4 theatrical sequels total, comic books, Tim Burton's remake, and the reboot series that are currently running, which will be 4 strong by this summer. A lot of apes out there. The TV series, though, at least gave us Fox's merchandising and ad campaign, which is 20th Century Fox wants you to go ape, with an ape doing the classic Uncle Sam point. It's one of the best ad campaigns I've ever seen. It was to coincide with the TV show. And they also had like 60 different companies licensed to crank out 300 different kinds of Planet of the Apes merch, which the film historian who's quoted in the documentary says like predates the Star Wars merchandising blitz and may have even paved the way for it.
Only 14 episodes, though.
Yeah, it did not do well.
So that's all insane, but of course, why would we cover any of those? Because none of them are as good as the original. But the lead up for the first sequel to Planet of the Apes does have one interesting bit, which is that they went back to Rod Serling for it, and also the French author of the original book, APE-ril. Producer Arthur Jacobs told Cinema Fantastique, "We didn't plan any sequels on the first one, but it became so successful that Fox said, you must do a sequel if you can come up with one. First, I went to APE-ril to write the screenplay, and he did write a treatment for a sequel titled Planet of the Men, but it wasn't cinematic. Boule's treatment, which you recall was titled Planet of the Men, featured Taylor leading an uprising against the apes 14 years after the events of the first film. So he was middle-aged in the first film. He would have been like
60.
Yeah. Boule told Cinefantastique, they accepted the treatment that I worked on, but they made so many changes that very few of my ideas were left. It was completely different from what they finally used on the screen. He didn't particularly like writing a screenplay and ultimately said, in his French way, I played the game, but my film was never made, and I don't even want to publish it, and it will never be.
Smoking a cigarette, like glasses, staring out a window, a rain-splattered Parisian window.
Shirt unbuttoned to his waist.
Yeah. An underage child in bed next to him. No, sorry. I am not tarring all of the French as pederasts, just many of their most important cultural figures and politicians.
Rod Serling then heard from the producers.
Have you ever seen the lemon incest video?
Oh, of course.
Okay.
Do you want to tell our listeners what that's all about?
It depends how much French slandering you keep in the final edit of this. But
sure.
yeah, it's Serge Gainsbourg in bed with his
real life daughter.
Then 12-year-old daughter.
Oh, yeah. I forgot about the age thing, too. Yeah.
Yeah. And they're in underpants and like top shirts.
Set to the melody of Friedrich Chopin's Etude Op 10, number 3.
Incredible.
As an adult, Charlotte Gainsbourg routinely defended the song. Its lyrics, written by Serge Gainsbourg, describes an incestuous relationship between him and his daughter Charlotte, the latter of whom sings in French, "The love we will never make together is the most beautiful, the most violent, the purest."
I should have a meme of that video and then like send it to the French social account that's like from Black Panther. Like, is this your king?
Charlotte denied claims that the song was actually about incest, saying that although the song uses the word incest, her father was, quote, just talking about the infinite love of a father for his daughter and of a daughter for her father.
Weird people, man.
So back to the Planet of the Apes sequel. Rod Serling then heard from the producers. He recalled in an interview printed in the pages of Marvel's Planet of the Apes comics.
Mm-hmm. Which I have seen. There is a full PDF scan of this issue out there.
Well, Serling told Planet of the Apes comics, producer Arthur Jacobs offered it to me, the sequel job, from London, and I remember spending $200 on a phone conversation about what we do with it, the sequel. We literally got into the hydrogen bomb and the resurgence of civilization over the apes, and we very much plugged the concept of the apes' desperate fear of the humans, because the humans repeated what they'd done before, which essentially was to wreck the Earth. As it turned out, I couldn't do the script when Arthur wanted it done. I was on another assignment, so I didn't have the remotest connection with the approach Jacobs eventually went with. Wonder what he was doing. That's a shame.
Let's take a look. He was doing television commercials in the 70s.
Probably paid better.
Yeah. No, he was back on radio by 1973. And his final, do you know this about Rod Serling? His final radio performance was a 48-hour-long rock concert.
With who?
It reunited the Beatles among one, and it was completely imaginary. But it was like, it used live records, crowd noise, interviews, other sound effects as like a hoax.
Whoa, that's cool.
And Serling hosted it and did like the radio bumpers.
Whoa. God, he was only 50 when he died in 1975? Jesus. What
Chain smoker, baby.
Oh, man. Wow.
3 to 4 packs of cigarettes a day.
Wow. So unfortunately, we never got a Rod Serling penned Planet of the Apes sequel. Instead, it was written by associate producer Mort Abrams. Never a good idea when the producer writes the sequel
He's
script.
the ideas man.
Yeah.
He's the ideas guy.
And a guy by the name of Paul Den. Den, you say, is a British writer who is no slouch. He'd written Goldfinger. Okay, all right.
Yeah.
And 2 John le Carre adaptations. And his last script was an adaptation of Agatha Christie's Murder on the Orient Express for Sidney Lumet, which was nominated for an Oscar. It lost, but it lost to Godfather 2, so it's okay. But damn, he loved these apes. He would go on to get a credit on every ape sequel.
The sort of world weariness, like flat affect you put into that, but damn, did he love these apes. That was my favorite line reading I've ever done on this show.
Boogaloo until we puke.
Well, Jordan, do you have anything to have anything to add to the apes, buddy?
We still don't know why that's such a funny word.
No, we'll never.
No.
If some linguist will Venmo you $5. Some linguist wants to write in and tell us why it's so inherently hilarious. Well, folks, we've gone as far as we can with the original Planet of the Apes, and we are unwilling to go further down the madness-inducing sprawl of its legacy, which means we're at something of a stalemate.
Hold for applause.
We can only hope that this episode spurs you to go on your own exploratory mission into the world of the apes, where, in the end, you'll at least be armed with the knowledge to tell them, authoritatively, to finally get their stinking paws off you. Folks, this has been Too Much Information, Too Much Mapes. Shun.
The real apes were the friends we made along the way.
And I'm Alex Heigl. And I helped.
And I'm Jordan Runtagh. We'll catch you next time.
Too Much Information was a production of iHeartRadio.
The show's executive producers are Noel Brown and Jordan Runtagh.
The show's supervising producer is Michael Alder June.
The show was researched, written, and hosted by Jordan Runtagh and Alex Heigl.
With original music by Seth Applebaum and the Ghost Funk Orchestra.
If you like what you heard, please subscribe and leave us a review. For more podcasts on iHeartRadio, visit the iHeartRadio app, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you listen to your favorite shows.